Welcome to the Gladden Longevity Podcast with Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, where our passion is helping you become an age hacker. On this show, we want to help you optimize your life energy, longevity, health, and human performance with impactful and actionable information by answering 4 questions. How good can we be? How do we make 100 the new 30? How do we live well beyond 120? And how do we live young for a lifetime? I'm Steve Reiter, and Dr. Gladden, we are here with another question and answer, one of our monthly question and answer sessions.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it's summertime, and we've got UV Safety Month right now, as well as Health Vision Month. So taking care of our eyes during the summer.
Okay.
So how's your summer been going?
Great. It's been good. Yeah, I've been spending more time in Texas. It's been good. We hit a bit of a cool spell here. Got in some mountain biking this past weekend, so that was really cool.
Where do you go mountain biking in Texas?
Oh, there's
I
trails
imagine
everywhere. They're off-road trails, but there's a lot of people think there's no mountains, and there aren't mountains. But, when you're in the woods and you're crossing creeks and you're climbing stuff, there's lots of technical trails here that can be very challenging, right? So it's super fun.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, UV Safety Month.
Yeah.
So we've got a few articles that our producer Leo had sent, like how to protect different skin types and tones, and wearing sunblock indoors.
Yeah. Wearing sunblock indoors. Okay. Yeah, I think the first thing to think about with skin is to understand if you have a genetic predisposition for melanoma. And you can figure that out to some extent by, looking at your family, and then also kind of looking at your skin type. If you're fair skinned, of course, you have a higher incidence of skin cancer. The genes for melanoma, though, are kind of inherited a little bit independently of that per se. So just because you have darker skin doesn't mean that you don't have a risk for melanoma. So it's kind of important to know those risks. And the Intellex DNA report that we've talked about before, it's spelled INTELLXX. It's not sold to the public. We do it all the time for our clients. You can get it done here. There are other practitioners also, but it's Intellex DNA. They do a really nice job of looking at genes around a number of different conditions. One of them is the melanoma pathway. And so one of the nice things about their report is that you can look and see if you have these genes. I'm looking at it right now. They list 2, 4, 6, about 6 genes that are directly related to the risk for melanoma. And so that can be very helpful. And then what they do is they basically, depending on the gene that you have, you can actually look at things that may be particularly helpful for you. So I'm a big fan of actually, knowing what you're dealing with before you start dealing with it, so to speak.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, there are some things that are generally good to do. So you're probably familiar with the fact that sunscreens in general are a good idea, but the problem with a lot of sunscreens is that they contain a lot of toxic things. And I pulled up a few of them here. So there's oxybenzone, it can act as a hormone disruptor. There's octin oxate, which can also be an endocrine disruptor. There's octocrylene, which can cause allergic reactions and degrade into some harmful compounds, apparently, when it's exposed to the sun. Homosalate that can penetrate the skin and be a hormone disruptor. Parabens can mimic estrogen and disrupt hormones. Retinol palmitate, vitamin A, can break down into free radicals when exposed to the skin. And vitamin A can be used to treat things like acne. And interestingly enough, we think that it's good for our eyes. But if you have risk of macular degeneration or a family history of that, it's actually bad for your eyes. So again, the Intellex DNA does a nice panel on macular degeneration also, which also sort of ties in with sun protection. We'll talk about that in a second. And then different fragrances in these different sunscreens can be a problem for your health. And there are other phthalates are there, which are endocrine disruptors, and formaldehyde as used, or things that contain formaldehyde. So those can be carcinogenic. So the kind of things you want to look for in a sunscreen are zinc oxide, titanium dioxide, non-nano found formulations, natural oils and butters, aloe vera, and certain antioxidants. And one of the things that we've started using that we have in the supplement shop we like a lot is a Clotho skin cream. Clotho is a protein that basically is associated with anti-aging effects and also works really well on the skin. We also have a cream that contains spermidine that has some anti-aging effects too. So when I come out of the sun, I tend to use those creams on my skin. But what I do going into the sun is I take HelioCare, which is an oral capsule. And if I'm going to be out in the sun and it's pretty bright, I'll take two. If it's a little cloudier day, I'll take one. And I take it about every 4 hours that I'm out. I'm usually not out in the sun for more than 4 hours in a day. Be a pretty unusual day. But I find that to be magical, even for people that burn easily. When they take the HelioCare, they don't seem to burn. And so I find that to be really, really good. Sunscreen can be a little messy, a little sloppy. It rubs off, particularly if you're in the water. There are water resistant ones, but it can be, you towel off or whatever, you're wiping it off. So for me, the HelioCare is kind of the foundational piece that I use when I'm out in the sun. And then the other thing I like is I like melanotan 2, which is a peptide that augments melanin formation in the skin from the melanocytes. So you actually tan much faster. And having darker skin also helps protect your skin to some extent. So I use melanotan 2, every couple of weeks, maybe 10 or 15 units. Can make you feel a little nauseous for 10 or 15 minutes. And then I use the HelioCare basically daily. And I use the HelioCare even when I'm not out in the sun because they've got good data that it really does decrease the risk of all kinds of skin cancer, squamous cell, basal cell, and now there's even data on melanoma. So that's kind of my approach. But if you want to use sunscreen on top of that, then stay away from some of the more commercial ones and go for ones that have zinc oxide, titanium oxide, some of the natural oils and butters, aloe vera, things like that. And then after you're in the sun, I really like using the Clotho cream and the spermidine cream. So those would be the things that I do. So if that's helpful.
Yeah, I just recently this summer started using HelioCare after hearing it enough times on the podcast, and I'm blown away at how my skin feels in this Colorado altitude, thin air, high UV environment, higher UV environment.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan. I mean, when I go on a big hike, I'll take one or two, and then I'll take one or two on the hike with me. Like, for example, if I'm summiting a mountain above tree line, I'll usually take one at the top. So that way I've got that extra protection on the way down.
Right. Exactly. And if people want to know what some of those non-toxic sunscreens are, we did a podcast with the Green Goo people, and the Green Goo people have a solar goo that's non-toxic, has zinc oxide in it. That's a good one. There's one from Australia for sensitive skin called Blue Lizard Australian sunscreen, which can be good. And then there's some other ones out there as well, but those might be the ones to look at. The Green Goo people do a really nice job with their products, so I'd recommend that if you want to look at a sunscreen.
So if anyone listening is interested in trying out HelioCare, you can go to GladdenLongevityShop.com, and if you use the code podcast10 in your checkout, you'll get 10% off your order. And that's not just a one-time thing. It's just for our podcast listeners, get you 10% off your orders. And
we have the Clotho cream in there too, as well as the spermidine cream. So if you want to try those.
And also in there, you have the pure hyaluronic acid and the Argentine 23 homeopathic silver first aid gel.
That's right. Yeah. So if you're out there and you get scrapes and cuts or get a a bite or something, you're worried about it getting infected, the silver is really good kind of disinfectant. I also find that ozonated creams are really good too. We're not carrying those currently, but those are very helpful, like ozonated olive oil, ozonated hemp oil can be useful too. And when you treat these cuts this way, you actually decrease scarring. So let's
Really?
say you're out, yeah, let's say you're out mountain biking or something, you get scratched or whatever. Use the ozone, use the silver. Both of them will decrease infection and decrease scarring. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's also Health Vision Month. And so we have a few articles here about macular degeneration and how to protect your eyes. So there's
Yeah.
one here from ABC 7, Channel 7, I believe in Los Angeles, that picking the perfect pair, tips for choosing sunglasses that actually protect your eyes. What are your thoughts, Dr. Gladden, about eye protection and what should people be doing and choosing in glasses, sunglasses, etc.?
No, I really like polarized sunglasses. I think they do a really good job of cutting glare. I think one of the issues for people that have a sensitivity to macular degeneration or even cataract formations is that when you get all that bright sunlight beaming in on your eyes, uh, it basically, increases oxidative stress on the retina, increases damage to the retina. One of the problems with macular degeneration is people can't heal the damage to the retina. And they also accumulate something called drusen underneath the retina, which causes damage to the retina. So, using a Polaroid lens is particularly if you're out on the water or things like that. I think that's the first thing to do. So that's what I would recommend. The other thing you can do is you can actually make sure that the lenses are made out of particular material. So there's polycarbonate lenses that naturally block 100% of UV rays. There's Trivex lenses that also block 100% of UV radiation. Um, some of the high index plastic lenses will also block 100% of UV radiation. And there's another one called CR39, which is also a plastic lens that will be effective when you combine it with a UV coating. So there are also UV coatings that you can have applied to regular sunglasses or reading glasses or whatever else if you're out in the sun, and that will block 100% of the UV as well. So I think combining, the Polaroid element and then using something that's either absorbing the UV or blocking the UV with these polycarbonate lenses, Trivex lenses, high index plastic lenses, or a UV coating is really kind of the hot ticket. And I think the glasses I have when I'm going to be out on the ocean or something like that, or fly fishing, let's say, kind of wrap around. They're large lenses, so they really kind of cover all of my eyes. And then they wrap around on the sides to kind of cut down on the side light that comes in as well.
Nice. I have a pair of Oakley glasses that I wear when I'm hiking or when I'm outside, that they have the transitions lenses as well as that UV protection. And so I'm a big fan of them. I'm a big fan of having that for my hikes.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's great. You get so much sun there in Colorado. And the other thing is, wear a hat, wear a shirt. There are UV protection shirts, and if I'm here in Texas this summer. I live at a place that has a swimming pool, so we'll go out, later in the afternoon or whatever, not when the sun's straight overhead, but just kind of float around and chat. And wearing a hat with some sunglasses and then the HelioCare and, whatever, it seems to work well. And then the other thing is to just limit your time in the sun, right? So I think the people that are most at risk are golfers and tennis players, where you're out there and you don't really control how long you're going to be out there because you're playing a game and it could go short, it could go long or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
in that case, you've got to have a certain vigilance about it, where it's like, okay, every 3 hours, I'm gonna redose, I'm gonna redo, I'm gonna do whatever, right? So just if you take that tact, I think you can really enjoy yourself in the sun. So
We have another article from Leo that the title is Vision Loss Breakthrough. Scientists find AREDS, AREDS, AREDS 2 supplements slow macular degeneration. What are your thoughts on this, Dr. Gladden?
Well, it's interesting when you think about macular degeneration. As I mentioned before, the Intellex DNA people do a really nice job of looking at the genetics there. And if this runs in your family, you really should do this profile. And what they found was that things that the Intellex people have been saying for years, which is that you want to stay away from vitamin A products, and you want to use things like lutein and zenaxanthin. That was what was used in the trial. And zenaxanthin is an anti-inflammatory; it protects the macula from oxidative stress. And lutein actually downregulates a particular gene that is overactive in macular degeneration and basically activates the immune system in a way that's harmful. So there are some other ones that work great too. So lutein, zenaxanthin, spelled Zeaxanthin, and lutein, spelled Lutein, and then pterostilbene. We know this from blueberries, and resveratrol actually works well here. And saffron is actually very, very potent when it comes to protecting your eyes. So they didn't measure saffron, but saffron is really excellent. And luteolin, we talked about lutein, but luteolin is also wonderful for this, Luteolin. And sulforaphane also protects the eyes. So sulforaphane comes from broccoli. Curcumin is great too. You can't take all of these potentially. The ones that we tend to prioritize, saffron seems to be one of the strongest ones. Zenaxanthin is great. Lutein is great. Resveratrol is great. So those are things to think about. The other thing to realize is that when you have some of these genes for macular degeneration, in particular the HTRA1 gene, if you're a smoker, you have a 15 times increased risk of developing macular degeneration, right? That's 15 times the risk from smoking, right? So if you like tobacco, if you like smoking, and there's a history of macular degeneration in your family, you may want to think twice about that. And again, for each of the genes that are associated with macular degeneration, there are a number of them here. I'm not going to try to go through all of them. Basically, the supplements I just mentioned work well for each of these genes. There are some other ones that show up, but basically, the ones I mentioned just earlier work great and will pretty well cover you. And that in combination with the right lenses, as we talked about, and then the UV protection, and then the Polaroid elements and the wraparound is really, I think, a great way to protect your eyes. So.
All right, we have an Instagram reel that I had sent Leo, and you watched it right before we recorded, about Chinese scientists using stem cells to basically get people off of insulin to help with diabetes. What were your thoughts? There was an article, a study that was talked about there. We found it, looked it over. What were your thoughts on stem cells being used for insulin and diabetes?
Yeah, well, it's really been kind of a holy grail type question, right? Because we can do so many things with stem cells. And yet, even with the most sophisticated stem cell procedures, we've had a great deal of difficulty rebooting the beta cells, which are in the islets of Langerhans. So you have a pancreas, right? A pancreas has these little islands, call them, and inside those islands are called islets, are the beta cells. And the beta cells are what's releasing the insulin. When those beta cells either wear out from being asked to produce too much insulin because somebody's overweight and it takes a lot of insulin to get the glucose into their cells, so they just it's like revving your motor to 10,000 RPMs all the time. It burns out, right? So you burn out the beta cells. Or the beta cells are attacked, like in type 1 diabetes, by an antibody and sort of killed off. It's been very, very difficult to reboot those beta cells. And many, many stem cell therapies have been tried. What's interesting is that in China, what they did was they took a stem cell that's not prone to form tumors, right? If you get a stem cell that's so early in its development that it can do anything, it also can form tumors, whether they're benign tumors or potentially cancer tumors. So there's a risk. And it's not to say that those stem cells can't play a role in certain situations, but they can have downsides. Now, the other thing is that when stem cells are more differentiated, like hematopoietic stem cells or mesenchymal stem cells, they have less ability to do everything, but they're much less apt to cause a tumor, right? So there's a certain safety in using those. What they did here was they took an endo progenitor cell or stem cell, and they actually injected it not into the pancreas, but they injected it into the liver. So now they're putting these beta cells, progenitor cells, into the liver, right? And then the beta cells develop there into these islets because they'll naturally kind of create what they're designed to create. And then the liver, from the liver, they apparently were pushing out insulin and then controlling people's blood sugars. And there were case reports of a number of people getting off their insulin altogether, which is really kind of cool. It's super cool in conjunction with, not only because of the trouble of taking insulin all the time, but if it's coupled with, weight loss and improved gut biome and improved dietary choices and things like that, you could get to a point where you really don't have diabetes at all. And you may not even have insulin resistance, which is super exciting. So I would say it's still early stages. It's only been done in China. And sometimes things done in China need to be validated outside China. But right.
Read between the lines.
Read between the lines. But if it's true, and it can be validated and it can be replicated, then it's super exciting stuff. We've been trying to do it for a long time.
Well, I agree with you. In conjunction, especially for people with type 2 diabetes, in conjunction with eating better, losing weight, exercising, those core things that people should be doing instead of just, going to the doctor, getting the stem cell injection, and okay, I'm good. I can still go back on my standard American diet.
Yeah.
And not exercise. You're probably still going to run into problems.
You're going to burn them out. You're going to burn them out again, right? So
yeah. But where I got really excited about this is my late wife's, one of her best friends, has type 1 diabetes.
Yeah.
And I would assume, that you would see, yes, this could be massive for people with type 1 diabetes whose lives are cut short because this is something that they're struggling with their entire life.
Right. And I think, in type 1 diabetes, it's more of an autoimmune disorder, which really boils down to an immunoregulation disorder, right?
Okay.
And so, right, that's really the way to think about it. So then the question becomes, well, why do they have autoimmunity? And there are ways to kind of dissect that to figure out, if we do put beta cells in, are they just going to be attacked again? Or is there something we can do to pre-treat the immune system, and not necessarily with an immunosuppressant, but a rebalancing of the immune system so that they're not prone to, gobble up these new beta cells also. So that's a pretty sophisticated equation there, and it hasn't been perfectly worked out because, nobody's really been able to do this before. So
yeah,
but that would be part of the strategy there. Yeah.
But I would assume would give people some hope that in the future this could be
Correct.
Something that could be.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. Like I said, we've been trying to do it for a long time. In the meantime, if you're struggling with diabetes, one of the best things you can do, I think, really, and there's some really nice data that came out from the Prolon fast mimicking diet, where they had people do a 5-day fast mimicking diet. Basically, it's a kit that you get from a company called Prolon, and it contains nutritional things like olives and nuts and some soups and things like that. And you eat those things and only those things, along with drinking some water, for about 5 days, or it is 5 days. And what they're showing is a dramatic improvement in insulin resistance. It does so many helpful things. Not only does it increase autophagy and cellular renewal and mitophagy and things that are good at the cellular level, it's actually resetting the gut biome. It actually resets your taste buds. It resets your appetite, right? And so it's much easier to sort of not go back to eating the same stuff when you finish. And if you architect the environment to support the mission, and you take out all the Twinkies and the ice cream and the cookies that you don't want to be eating when you finish it, and you start eating things that are healthy that you also enjoy, in smaller quantities, your stomach will shrink to some extent, so it's harder to eat more. And what they find is if you do that fast moving diet once a month for 3 months, they have a dramatic improvement in insulin resistance and diabetes.
Oh,
So, yeah, so that's something you can do now, and probably, quite honestly, should be done prior to any kind of a stem cell transplant.
really?
So, yeah, yeah,
Interesting.
because you're basically teeing your body up to be in this very rejuvenated, regenerated space, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
ooh. Dr. Gladden dropping some wisdom on this podcast.
Yeah. No, it's super cool. Yeah.
All right. Finally, we have a listener question. Actually, David Potter asked 2 questions. He said,
Two questions from David Potter. Oh my gosh. Okay.
I listened to the recent podcast number 242 with Dr. Margaret Christensen. In this podcast, Dr. Gladden said he uses a filter to get bad stuff out of the blood. Please tell us more about that.
Yeah. So there's 2 filters. Well, let me say this: before you start filtering, you got to know what's bad in your blood, right? So we've started using a new test called a Carius test. We started using a new test called a Carius test, spelled Karius, and it measures 2,500 different infections that you might have in the blood of all kinds of things. So we're not talking about toxins here, but we're talking about infectious agents, if you will, viruses, funguses, et cetera, et cetera. So if you do the Carius test and you see that you've got some things in there that you don't want, then you can have your blood filtered. Plasmapheresis won't really filter out that kind of stuff. It's not going to get
Really?
rid of that. No, it doesn't really. What it does is it separates plasma from red cells, so you can actually throw away the old plasma and put in new plasma or new, albumin and saline and young factors or something. But it's not filtering. It's a separation of the cells
Yeah.
in the plasma. So to actually filter the blood, you need to run it through an actual filter. So there's 2. One is EBOO, EBOO, which we do here in the clinic, and it's combined with ozone. So you basically filter the blood, and then you ozonate the blood. And the ozonation has an antimicrobial impact, but it also has the ability to improve the NAD to NADH ratio. So all of a sudden, you have a lot more NAD to boost your mitochondrial function, your energy production, things like that. And so that can be helpful. We've been doing it for people with mold, and it takes several treatments, right? It's about an hour treatment. You can do a treatment, remeasure, and see that it went down. Do it again, it goes down. And so it takes maybe 3, 4, 5 treatments to get where you want to go, depending on where you started. There's another filter made by a company, Xterra, in California, called a Seraph filter. And the Seraph filter basically uses heparin molecules attached to it, so heparin sulfate. And the heparin sulfate is negatively charged. And it turns out that so is your endothelial glycocalyx, right? The fine seaweed, if you will, that lines the inside of your arteries, that keeps your arteries healthy. That really kind of protects your arteries. It's negatively charged also. And most pathogens have learned to be attracted to that negative charge because that's their entryway into the body, right? If they attach to that and then go through the endothelium, they get into the body. So the Seraph filter has this negative charge, heparin sulfate, and heparin sulfate actually is present in the glycocalyx. So you're kind of mimicking that. And it tends to attract bad guys out, viruses, bacteria, mold, everything else. And the Seraph filter, spelled SERAPH, was initially or is approved for emergency use in COVID sepsis. It's undergoing other trials for other potential FDA indications, but it's currently approved for that because it's been used in ICUs to actually remove the COVID virus from patients and, start to turn the course with their sepsis. So those are the 2 filters that we're familiar with. The EBOO is generally available. Well, not generally. I mean, we have it here. I suppose there's select places where you can find it. And the Seraph filter is present in hospitals like in ICUs for that indication. It also is available on Antigua, the island of Antigua. It's being used in conjunction with some cancer research and some other areas. So anyway, those are the things that I'm most familiar with.
All right. The other question that David Potter has is Dr. Gladden says he uses non-cellular rejuvenation factors from placental tissue. Please tell us more about that.
Yeah. So when we think about embryos, embryonic stem cells, we talked earlier in the podcast about
Tumors.
tumor formation from stem cells that are very, very immature, right? And so embryonic stem cells have been shown to have a tumorigenicity to them, right? They can form benign tumors like what's called a teratoma, which is basically kind of a mass of different kinds of tissue. It could be hair, teeth, nails. It's kind of a conglomerate of different tissues, or it could cause cancer. But in the placenta and in the umbilical cord are factors that support regeneration that are not cellular. So in other words, it's not a cell with a nucleus and DNA, but it's all the exosomes and all the cytokines and all the factors that basically support rejuvenation that can be found there. And it's what enables a child, a newborn child, if they were to break a bone, to heal it incredibly quickly, or whatever else. These factors are present early in life and we lose them. So if we use those factors as a standalone, it can be super helpful. If you use those factors in combination with stem cells, the proper stem cell for the indication, and you use those factors in conjunction with, let's say, plasmapheresis. So let's say you take out the bad stuff with plasmapheresis, right? You just throw it away in a trash can and you give somebody back young plasma or saline albumin. Now you actually put in these good factors, right? And then you drop in your stem cells, and then you drop in your peptides to support the whole system, and then you drop in your EBU, right, to be able to ozonate and filter out any other bad stuff. And then all of a sudden, you can get some amazing results for people. So that's kind of on the rejuvenation spectrum. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Dr. Gladden, anything else you want to talk about this month? Thank you, David.
Yeah, thanks, David. No, I think that we're working really hard here at Gladden Longevity to map out the aging process. So we're in the middle of mapping it out. I just finished a diagram. You're familiar with the circles that we've developed, but I've created a diagram that shows the interrelatedness of all the hallmarks of aging. And one of the things that makes longevity complicated is that everything feeds off everything else.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's really like a knot. And being able to understand the interrelationships, what are primary, what's secondary, and almost anything can be primary and almost anything can be secondary in this field. What I mean by that is you can have DNA damage that leads to a senescent cell. Senescent cell leads to cancer. Cancer leads to more senescent cells. Cancer leads to more DNA damage. So you get this kind of swirl of things going on. And so one of the things that we're really working hard at is mapping those interrelationships, then looking at the underlying mechanisms behind those hallmarks, then looking at the testing we can currently do to understand where somebody is in relationship to those hallmarks, and then also in relationship to how those mechanisms are working. And then the final sphere outside of that is looking at the therapies that we can apply that will modulate the system back into basically a youthful homeostasis or a youthful pattern. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's super fun.
How's that been progressing? What have been some insights that you have taken from this journey?
Well, I think the insight is that the first insight is that it's really kind of foolhardy to think that if you're just doing stem cells, that's going to be your answer. Or if you're just doing spermidine and urolithin A, for autophagy and mitophagy, that's going to be your hot ticket. There are many hot tickets, but there's no singular hot ticket. And so really the key to this is understanding where you are in this process and then looking for all the different ways that you can test it and understand it, and then looking at all the different ways that you can leverage things in concert with each other, sort of in the symphonic way, to actually move this whole ecosystem back into this youthful expression. So, yeah, that's the biggest insight.
Dr. Gladden, any final thoughts for listeners?
Well, enjoy your summer. It's great. Get outside, man. Get your bare feet on the ground and sunshine in your hair, and have some fun.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And if you have a question that you want Dr. Gladden to answer, email us at podcast@gladdenlongevity.com. That's podcast@gladdenlongevity.com. We appreciate those questions, and we will do our best to answer them. So have a good month, Dr. Gladden. I will see you next month.
All right. You too, Steve. Thanks.
This episode of the Gladden Longevity Podcast is brought to you by the new molecular hydrogen formulas of Chill and Energy.
Yeah, Chill and Energy were a couple of things that I learned about through NES Health. And we discovered that when you combine their infoceutical with hydrogen, you actually get an expanded effect from what you would just using it by itself. So we're very excited to work through the ability to actually infuse, if you will, or imprint the hydrogen tablet with the information related to chill and to energy.
You can hear more about the physics of how this formulation came about if you go to the interview that we did with Harry Massey on episode 191.
You know, when we were trying this in the office, we gave it to some willing clients and also willing staff, and we heard repeatedly how much the chill actually worked for them. If they were kind of anxious or feeling upset about something, if they dropped the hydrogen in the water and let it dissolve and drank it, not only did they get the benefits of hydrogen, which is kind of energizing in a way of making your brain kind of wake back up, but they also felt very calm and relaxed. And so we were very excited to bring it forward. And when we started using H2 Energy and combining those two together, we found a really nice energy boost before we went to go work out or do a mountain bike ride or go for a run or any of these things. And so this is the first two of a family of hydrogen products, I'll say augmented or advanced hydrogen products that we're bringing forward. So these are really the most advanced hydrogen products, I think, on the planet.
I love taking an H2 Chill right before I hop in the sauna and an H2 Energy either before I do a podcast with you or afterwards because my brain is pretty tired. Get 10% off your order of H2 Chill and H2 Energy when you use the code podcast10 at gladdenlongevitysshop.com. That's podcast10 at checkout when you visit gladdenlongevitysshop.com.
Gladden Longevity Molecular H2, Chill and Energy. It's an upgrade to your hydrogen toolkit.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Gladden Longevity Podcast. If you would like more information on what we've discussed or other topics, please reference the show notes or go to gladdenlongevitypodcast.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter by searching Gladden Longevity. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to get future episodes delivered to you and share our podcast or this episode with someone in your life that you may find benefit. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another exciting episode. The Gladden Longevity Podcast is provided for informational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of a physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. The use of any information and materials linked to this podcast is at the listener's own risk.